So welcome to the participants. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the Management Forum sharing episode 3. So Management Forum is a sharing session held by the Department of Management of Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. And we do this monthly forum to share about research, also to share about new themes, emerging themes that is interesting for research. And in this session, we have as our guest, Professor Denise Fletcher. So thank you, Denise, for coming, for joining us. So if I may introduce Denise, I believe my first encounter was when you were giving a guest lecture in Jönköping International Business School in GIBS in Sweden. And then at the moment, I believe she was giving this topic about relationality. And I was interested in that topic as well. And also Denise is doing research on family business and entrepreneurship. And what I admire is really her take into criticality about entrepreneurship as well as family business. So in this session, Professor Denise will share her ongoing work about modern slavery, organizational research, and digital technologies as field configuring events, and which I hope we can discuss more later in the interactive session. So Denise now is a professor in the University of Luxembourg, and also a senior editor for organization studies. Okay, Denise, I will give the time to you now. So please bring us through your work.
Okay, so thank you very much, Rocky, for that kind introduction. And good afternoon, all of the colleagues there from the faculty, from students, for joining this webinar. It's very nice to meet you, albeit I can't see your faces. And so I can't see who you are. I can't see if you're engaging and interacting, but hopefully I can raise some interesting points for us to have a dialogue about. So yes, I'm very happy to be doing this. It's an honor to be invited by Rocky. Rocky was an excellent, you may know that Rocky did his PhD with us at the University of Luxembourg. So he was an excellent student. Of course, I'm going to say that. And but he was very kind and very conscientious and a very committed student. So I'm very happy that we have continued to have our dialogue, and we're working on another paper together, and also then to be sharing this new topic that I have moved into in the last couple of years. So as Rocky said, my main research is entrepreneurship, small business, family business, and organization studies kind of more broadly in the management field. And it's a very interesting and very vibrant area, and I'm very focused, or more focused, on the kind of critical side of management. This is my main kind of passion and real interest. And I guess with that critical mindset in view, in the last couple of years ago, I had a sabbatical, and I really felt strongly impelled to try to move, to try to position my research more firmly in a topic that kind of mattered for society, that mattered for the economy. So, obviously things to do with corporate social responsibility and sustainability, particularly linked to the Sustainability Development Goals, are very important topics now. And so I started to read and also study around the topic of modern slavery. So I'm just going to switch to sharing my screen now.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I decided, can you see it, Rocky? Everything's clear?
Everything is good, yes.
Okay. So I made the decision to move to try to find a different context within which to explore issues to do with organization and entrepreneurship to some extent. And I started to become very concerned about the phenomena of modern slavery and human trafficking. And I saw also that organizational research was not very kind of proactive or leading edge in terms of research in this area. So I started to do reading and to deep dive into this field, which is clearly a very multidisciplinary field, political science, you know, geography, human geography, and a whole range of fields. And in particular, I started to get interested in the digital technology side as I started to look at various things that were happening in that field. And there's now a lot of empirical evidence that suggests that digital technologies are being applied or deployed in very new and innovative ways in general, but also in this particular field of modern slavery. But directly to connect with problems to do with modern slavery and human trafficking. And so this is where I started to explore a little more deeply. So I'm going to begin first of all by just saying a few words about, as I'm not sure about how many people who are listening are familiar. I'm sure that you've heard lots of news items, maybe documentaries, web reports, etc. on modern slavery. But modern slavery is defined as exploitative or coercive economic and cultural practices that deprive a person of their human rights and their liberty. And although we tend to think of modern slavery being connected with history and historical processes and the transatlantic slave trade, it's very worrying or worrisome to see that it's still going on today, and it's very prevalent today. And so it's a very persistent problem, even in the 21st century. So on the right-hand side of the screen there, you can see this is the first, it's called the Global Slavery Index, and it's the first index that pulls together all kinds of statistics and evidence and different data sources that try to unravel and probe into and clarify what is slavery and where is it occurring in different parts of the world. And from this Global Slavery Index, it's estimated that something like 40.3 million people are engaged in different forms of modern slavery, with forced labor being the most predominant form, with something like 16 million people employed in different forms of forced labor, domestic servitude, bonded labor, and even to some extent forced marriage, but although I'm really focusing on forced labor here. So there's different manifestations of slavery and different definitions, but it really is about these exploitative and coercive economic practices that actually deprive a person of their human rights and liberty. It tends to occur in industries related to domestic work and construction, brick production, agriculture. In the case of Indonesia, very much so in fishing, in the fisheries sector, but also in car washing, restaurants, hotels, mining and extraction. And also broadly, in a broad sense, the term modern slavery also incorporates human trafficking. And human trafficking is now also legally recognized as a means through which perpetrators enter a person from into slavery. So, and often sometimes also repurposing them when, if they're for health reasons or age reasons, they're not able to fulfill the purpose for which they were enslaved. So that's a broad kind of overview of modern slavery. And as I said, it's very prevalent across the world, even though it's illegal in many countries and many contexts. In the case of Indonesia, I had a little look around. I did manage to find, it seems as though the Global Slavery Index reports that something like 1.2 million people are involved in different forms of enslavement, which equates to about 5 persons per 100,000, which doesn't sound a lot when you think 5 persons per 100,000, but even if one person is involved in some kind of enslavement, this is something that it's obviously clearly completely inappropriate in modern society. So in Indonesia, then I found this paper in the European Research Studies Journal, which was looking at trafficking of migrant workers and more kind of the legal and the criminology side of it. So it would be good to get your feedback on whether, in academic terms, people are looking at modern slavery and trafficking as a research topic. Because certainly in the broader management field, as I now go on to show, it's actually not a topic that has been receiving a lot of attention. So based on a systematic literature search that I've done on modern slavery and human trafficking, looking at title, keywords and abstract across the ranked management, ranked journals in the business and management listing, you can see the distribution of output over time from 1970 to the present time. And you can see, you can see that from the early decades, from 1970 onwards, the output was very, very slow. And then it gradually started to increase around the year 2000 and beyond. Clearly, there's a lot happening there in terms of policy and institutional developments and the United Nations activities and various governments kind of getting on board with this topic. And in the last year or two, we've now seen a big growth in the number of outputs in this area. But historically, there's not been a lot of publications in the management field. And where they have occurred, they tend to have been, and I'll come back to that slide, they tend to have been, when you try to group together the literature here, they tend to be in certain kinds of topical areas. So a lot of the literature is focusing on the relationship between the institution of slavery and economic development and capitalist growth, and exploring that relationship there. Some other sets of studies are looking at slavery and its influence on management theory, and looking at the nature of plantation management and how that has influenced present day industrial management processes. There's also a preponderance of studies that focus on the actions of organizations, looking at their compliance activities, what they're doing in terms of supply chain management or corporate responsibility. And I would say that this is the bulk actually now of the present day literature, is focusing on what organizations are actually doing. Clearly, there's also a lot of policy analysis in this area. This is a huge area of work, but I'm just really focusing here on the management, the business and management research. Other dominant themes, as I say, is this practical level, looking at how organizations tackle modern slavery, particularly in their supply chains, how they identify it, how they track it, how they record it, how they try to remediate it when they find evidence of it. And there's also a number of industry studies. So a lot of researchers are focusing on different kinds of industries, the fishing industry, construction sector, cocoa, chocolate, seaports, and also looking at public monuments as well. And then there is also some more theoretical work. So the article I cite there is Crane, where there's also kind of some theoretical work trying to look at explanatory frameworks for explaining why modern slavery is still persisting today. So Crane is 2013 is one of the exemplary articles there, which I come back to in a moment. There's also studies on stigmatized workplaces, particularly related to sex work, child labor, and also public and ethical issues in society. So there is some literature, and it is actually getting quite stronger now the last couple of years, as management researchers are getting on board with this phenomena, with this topic, but it has been quite slow to evolve relative to other management topics. And I think that this is a little bit of a shame, and I think there is definitely space here for people to come into this space and to start researching. Obviously, it's a huge multidisciplinary topic. There's many different angles and emphases and different kinds of situations that could be researched. So maybe just go back to this slide here, again, referring to the distribution of the articles in the business and management field. You can see across here the range of articles and how they are in which kinds of sectors. This is journal sectors, publication sectors that the articles are published in. And you can see in this graph here that the category that is the most, I lost my place, sorry. The category that is the most predominant for publishing articles is what's known as the sector category. Then you see history and economics next, and then you see ethics, CSR, corporate social responsibility, and management as the third prevalent topic there. Accounting is also quite strong, ops and technology as well. So then you see towards the end of the graph, you see information management as the least published. There's only one publication there. Innovation, on organization and management science, and international business are quite remiss in having publications in ranked journals. So I'm not saying that there's no research. There's clearly a lot of research, but often they're not in the AJG ranked journals. Okay. So the two most, sorry for the jumping around. There's two articles that are the most highly cited in the field. So clearly when you're starting into a new research topic, it's really helpful to look at to do a literature search on the topics, on the articles that are being published in that area, and then also to look at which ones are the most cited. These two articles here by Cook in Journal of Management Studies is the most highly cited, but still only 304 citations, so not as high as articles on related to corporate social responsibility and other topics in the management field, or let's say social enterprise, or sort of hot topics. And but what the Cook article was arguing was that there's been this denial of slavery in management studies, and which was very much the case in 2003. I think it is changing now. I think that academic commentators are beginning to engage with the whole phenomena of modern slavery in different ways. So this was quite a seminal. Was quite a seminal article in the management field. And then also the article by Andy Crane, where, as I said, this was one of those articles which is a theory article, and looking at trying to develop a theoretical framework for explaining why modern slavery is still persisting today, and what are the different components out there in culture and society, the economy and geography, that enable it to still continue and flourish. Okay, so that's just a few words about the sort of literature context and the dominant and the themes that are dominating the literature. And now then kind of coming down to the topic that I'm researching. What I would argue even today is that studies on anti-slavery and anti-slavery organizations in particular are still quite few in number. And where they do exist, they tend to use historical data. So they're looking at anti-slavery organizations, but in historical times. Or maybe they're looking at entrepreneurial figures or leaders who were leading an anti-slavery organization, but back, 200 years ago or 100 years ago. So there's very few studies on modern day practices of anti-slavery in the business and management field. And there are some studies, and I list a few exemplary there, but you see there's only a little handful of them. And in particular, what is missing is analysis of how digital solutions are becoming very central to anti-slavery work. So my research objective then is to examine the ways in which anti-slavery organizations who employ or deploy technological solutions in their activities, how they take on and distribute discourses about human rights and the indignity of unfree labor. Okay, so I'm going to explain this in more detail now. So the research context then, whoops. I just want to move this around a moment so I can see fully my slides. Okay. So the research context then, so having explained the field of modern slavery and the phenomena of that, some statistics, this is kind of the broad context that I'm focusing on, but I'm in particular looking at the anti-slavery field of activity. And so this field of anti-slavery work is a recognized area or field of organizational life that is gaining in momentum. It's characterized by this constellation of different kinds of actors with different interests, so different platforms, artifacts, communities, lawyers, entrepreneurs, business owners, support agency, ground workers, non-governmental organizations, all working in this space on measures and solutions and policies to address the social and the political challenges posed by modern slavery and human trafficking. And they're also clearly working within this broader framework of formal rules and legislative guidelines, mostly related, that are coming from the UN or from the national governments, related to issues of compliance. So collectively, these constitute what I would call an institutional field, and working and pushing and promoting different interests. But it's governed by formal rules too, but there's also space for these different actors to compete against each other and to negotiate and work out their own, define the problem in their own way, and to identify which aspects of that problem they want to work on. So yeah, so this is just a kind of graphic representation of the whole field of anti-slavery. And this just captures different images of it. So on the right-hand side, there's a lot now of literature on voices from people that have been enslaved. So kind of testimonials or autobiographical accounts of people giving their experience of being an enslaved person. On the other side, on the left-hand side of the screen, you also see lots of legal developments. In the UK, for example, we have now, since 2015, the Modern Slavery Parliament Act. There's also an act in Australia. There's also something in California in the Supply Chain Transparency Initiative. There's also lots of documentaries around. The one in the middle there is called Made in Hell. It's a BBC documentary about domestic servitude and mostly women being taken from countries like Africa and taken into domestic work as maids and housekeepers and nannies in some of the Arab countries. There's also various initiatives and policy developments. So it's a very vibrant and a very dynamic institutional field with lots of things going on there. Okay. So this, I think I've said, so it's this vibrant institutional field, this constellation of actors. Some of them are socially minded. If you're an NGO, you have more of a socially minded, or you have a cause that you're promoting, or you're mission motivated. Others, as we saw with the legislative agenda, are more politically motivated, more so at the government policy and the UN level, with the Sustainable Development Agenda for eradicating slavery, etc. These are more politically motivated. And then you've got a set of actors who are looking for business opportunities, lawyers offering advice on compliance, for example. And then you've also got this very, very now emergent body of actors, organizational actors, who are technology motivated. So they have developed or are applying particular digital technologies, such as blockchain, and trying to think of ways to deploy them such that they can identify, remedy, or protect the conditions that engender modern slavery. So although they come together in this field with different interests and different motivations, sometimes social, political, economic, technology motivated, they form this constellation of activity, which I'm referring to as anti-slavery, but they also have a common purpose. This is a common purpose. They have a meaning system, at least in principle, which influences, which is to eradicate or reduce or tackle modern slavery and its conditions. And because they have that common interest, it means that they have this common language or meaning system which shapes how they interact with each other. Okay. So clearly in this work, there's many different dimensions that one could research: the institutional dimension, the organizational dimension, the different stakeholders, multi-stakeholder initiatives are there too. One could look at, as my PhD student, I don't know whether Alex is here, he was joining us, my PhD student, Alexander Braysom, is also looking at labour recruitment practices by intermediary labour agencies, because clearly they are also key actors in this field that are really there on the ground, recruiting and taking these different people from certain contexts and putting them into vulnerable contexts. So there's many different angles that can be looked at here. But there's also, and this is what I'm coming to now as I kind of funnel down, is this digital technology dimension. So many of the initiatives and the solutions that we're seeing being offered in the field are increasingly digital in focus and intention. And I'm going to give you some examples of these different kinds of business solutions now. So the first one, I just come out of this, I'm going to show you a video. I hope that this works okay. So I just go to my Safari.
I think you need to switch the share screen, Denise, later on.
Sorry, say again.
Maybe you need to share to switch your share screen to the Safari.
So I'm not sharing screen now.
Yeah, you're sharing only the PPT at the moment.
Oh, because it's telling me that I'm sharing.
Yeah, you can.
So do I need to do new share?
New share, yes.
Okay.
Let's see.
Can you see now?
Not yet. So maybe you can stop sharing and then switch to the other one. Yeah, okay.
So now you have me back.
Yeah.
So now we try again.
Just to make sure that you check also the share sound as well.
Can you see?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, this is just a 1-minute video.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hopefully the sound will be good. Okay, Rocky. Can you hear?
My name is Sweetie. I'm 10 years old. I live in the Philippines. Every day, I have to sit in front of the webcam and talk to men. But what they don't know, I'm not real. I'm a computer model, made piece by piece to track down these men who do this. Sign the petition now.
Okay, do you have my PowerPoint back, Rocky?
Yes, it's back now.
Okay. Okay, so this is clearly, as explained there, is a very interesting technology. Her name was Sweetie, and as you saw, she's an animated computer avatar designed particularly to trap offenders who are using live webcams, and she's kind of used in it as a sting operation to attract these offenders and yeah, to make contact with these predators in different countries. So it's clearly a very delicate, a very sensitive, very problematic area, the use of webcams for child sexual exploitation. And it's a really, really interesting technology that's being used in particular ways. So this is one technology. The next one is, there are also lots of apps that people can download. The first one here, on the left-hand side, you see Traffic Cam. So this one is to encourage people to help the fight against trafficking by, it might seem a little bit strange, but taking photographs of the carpet of the hotel room, and in particular also like the carpet. So because that's where a lot of sex trafficking offences are occurring. So by taking and building this database of images of hotels and the rooms, this is helps people identify where this is happening. There's also, car washers. This is a particular issue in the UK, where people are employed in forced labour to wash cars by hand, maybe in other countries too. So there's this app that you can download where you can see which car washers are safe. And there's all kinds of different initiatives and that maybe allow victims to report if they've been victims, if they've been victims themselves, or if they're aware of someone who maybe is vulnerable, to get help. So there's helplines and different apps all connected with raising awareness, educating people also about the problem, because there's also a lot of misinformation or maybe just a lack of understanding and awareness about the problem. We tend to think because we live in modern societies, it's not happening here, but it's happening all around us, even and also in developed countries. So there's resources, there's also an app where you can actually work out how many slaves you as an individual employ in the way that you consume, what you buy for your household, what you buy for your children, your mobile phone, etc. So there's many apps now that are being used to help consumers understand, be aware of their own consumption, their own role in this, and also apps for law enforcement and first line responders. So here is another example. This is a task force between Twitter, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. And it really is about creating a solution for handling masses of child sexual abuse data. So clearly it's very difficult for a police officer to manually sift through those and watch those images. So now different technologies can be used to handle the massive data and to identify images of children on their platforms, and then to share that with missing persons bureaus, etc. So so this information is provided free, but it provides valuable information for police. So these companies, like this one here, is called Thorn. So they operate with the mission of a non-profit, but they have the nimbleness of a startup. So already some interesting mix of discourse there to look at how they are positioning themselves. This is also another example here is Ulula, and this is a supply chain management stakeholder engagement and analytics software. And this is there's many different softwares that can be used to analyze what is happening in supply chains. This is a very booming area now. But this particular one is interesting because it tries to encourage the engagement of workers at the bottom of the supply chain, because this aspect is not always well kind of reported. So this enables labour voices and intelligence to be gathered on workers on the ground about their working conditions, and also gives them access to certain grievance mechanisms. So that's Ulula. And then there's also blockchain technology that's being used to track certain products. So this particular company or technology is called Provenance, and really trying to follow and track and trace the product from when it's, like, let's say in the case of fish. So they catch their fish and say of tuna origin, and then this batch can be recorded, and as each time that it moves along the supply chain, a digital record is kept, this ID of it, as kind of footprint of and tracking its process along the supply chain, to tag it, and also to ensure that there's no modern slavery being employed along that data chain, along that supply chain. This is also a very interesting one. This is slavery from space. So this is where satellite remote sensing is being used in particular ways. In this case, this is a project that comes out of Nottingham University, and in particular, it identifies brick kiln. So this brick here, this is a map, and includes the brick belt, where a lot of brick production by hand is undertaken across Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. So this is an area where brick making by hand is very predominant industry. And the satellite remote sensoring can actually identify from space the imprints in the land, in the landscape. So it's like a geospatial recognition. And you can see around the circles there, the different kind of imprints that are left. And also on the left-hand side, you see where the clay is being taken out of the fields. And often in this clay making sector, there's a lot of forced labor and enslavement, maybe bonded labor as well, debt labor. And so it's argued that this satellite imagery is good for identifying where these things are happening. And there is just another example of that there. So it leaves these very, very strong imprints on the land. So this geospatial remote sensoring is also becoming very active now, becoming a very useful technological tool. Okay, so that was just to give you some examples about the different ways. There's many other ways I could have put, but the different ways in which technologies are being used to identify, to remedy, to identify and provide solutions for modern slavery. So empirically, this is the kind of main motivation for my study. And I think they're a very interesting context because they show how ASOs, anti-slavery organizations, and bring together the social, maybe if they're working on a social cause. So all of these organizations have a social cause. They might be a for-profit business, but they have a social motivation to eradicate or help or address modern slavery in some way. So there's a social dimension, there's often a political dimension, there's a material dimension because the technologies are a material artifact that's being applied in a particular way. And there's also, one would argue, a moral dimension. And this gets into different kinds of debates about what is modern slavery and the moral component of that. But I would say that when we look at these anti-slavery organizations, they're very interesting because they entangle together all of these different dimensions in their activities. And we might call these activities field configuring events because they are trying to compete with other actors in the field. They're trying to shape, they're trying to interpret what the problem is. They're trying to come up with a solution as to how to address that problem. So they are configuring the field. They're having an active effect on the field. So they're field configuring events. So there's a lot of interesting things going on there, I think, I would argue. But what is not known is how these organizations actually negotiate. That's a very complex reality to negotiate: the social, the material, the technological side, the political side, the moral dimensions. It's a very, very complex ideological reality going on there. And as I say, one that's deeply moral and also highly political context. So I think it's interesting from a research perspective to look at how these entanglements of the material, the social, political, moral, are deployed by these anti-slavery organizations as tools of resistance. And what are their efforts to disrupt the actual conditions within which slavery persists in order to promote moral societal change. So that's kind of the empirical context and the motivation for why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why I think it's interesting and why I think it matters. And then moving on now to the theoretical aspects of the study. So clearly it's important to have your empirical context and to demonstrate why this field, that the context matters, why it's important. But at the same time, we need to have the theoretical resources that we are drawing upon to frame and shape the study. And in my study, I'm using the concept of discursive spaces. And this is a term, maybe some of you are familiar with this already, from Hardy and Maguire. And they're also looking at, they were looking at fields, so fields of activities and constellations of actors, and looking at how these actors carve out, compete with each other, and try to carve out spaces within which they position themselves, impose their own definition on that space, and how they reach out to different target groups. So this is the concept of discursive space. And I think it's a very relevant term for this kind of study. So the anti-slavery field is a site of contestation because of this kind of complex, emotive, ideological, moral things that characterize the space. And so I think we need to understand better how these different actors impose their definitions on what the problems are, how they position themselves, as I said, and how they reach out to different stakeholders and target groups. And also then going a little bit deeper is looking at how they employ certain value, how they demonstrate certain values, rhetorics, and repertoires, because I'm really interested in discourse analysis. Like I showed you the thorn example back then, and I said, look how they're using a discourse of not-for-profit and combining it with the flexibility or the nimbleness of a startup. So already you see a mixing of values or a mixing of ideologies or rhetorics, a startup rhetoric, but also a social dimension. And then if you add into that the modern slavery or human rights or something to do with eliminating that, you've got a really interesting mix that is empirically interesting and which you can really explore theoretically. So just to say a few words now, I'm coming to the end of, because this is research in progress, so I don't have all of my findings yet, but just to say a few words about research design. So I've talked about the empirical context, I've talked about the theoretical tools I'm drawing in. Now I'm going to say a few things about the research design. So what I'm applying here, because this is a field of activity for this phenomena, I'm calling this a field ethnography. Rocky will be familiar with this term because he was also employing this himself, and we talked a lot about this. But because modern slavery, or the topic of slavery, is an institutional thing, it's an institutional issue, and there's also the digital emphases, I'm calling this a field ethnography with institutional and digital emphases. So as I say, a field level of analysis is necessary because it's a global phenomena crossing all kinds of geographical and political demarcations. Also, a field ethnography, taking this field level approach, it means that you can immerse yourself in different practices. You're not kind of stuck to one unit of analysis. You can look at different practices and how they're spatially distributed and step back from at the same time to see how those practices at the organization level are embedded in this wider sort of field level discourses and these webs of coordinations that are happening, as I explained earlier about these constellations of practices. Clearly, the digital emphasis is essential because these are digital technologies, but also in a broader sense because digital media is explaining how these meanings are moving across different fields and sites and locations. And I already explained the institutional dimension, but then also I will use multimodal points of data collection. So clearly interviews with organizations will be important here, but also lots of different, so photographs, video material, iconography from websites, blog material, informal conversations, policy documents, etc. So in taking this focus, I can draw upon these multimodal points of data collection as well. So for the actual, so that's the design of the field work. Here now is the state, so there are two stages to the data collection itself. So what I want to do is build a data set, if you like, of these digital companies that I just gave some examples of. And I'm going to use the initiative which is called Tech Against Trafficking, which is primarily an American, a US-based initiative. And it's a coalition of, I think, roughly 200 technology companies coming together loosely to collaborate with global experts to eradicate this problem of modern slavery. So again, this provides an interesting initiative or coalition, and these companies have already signed up to the initiative, so they provide a useful data set that you can kind of drill down and go into and investigate more closely. So my plan which I haven't done yet because I'm still been doing all of the framing, positioning and theoretical work and literature reviewing work. But my plan is to really try to understand this field, the way of life in this field, in this tech against trafficking field. Clearly certain discourses are being used. There's all this datification of what is actually a social problem. So I think and I want to try to understand the cultural understandings that are embodied in this field, the anti-slavery technology field, I mean. So I'm going to start in a descriptive way. I've already started this, looking at the year of founding. What type of venture are they, these 200 companies? Are they NGOs? Are they a for-profit? Are they a governmental funded body? And a lot of them have this mix, this hybrid mix. So it's not actually that straightforward. Then my next step is to start to look at the technologies that they're using, you know, apps, blockchain, artificial intelligence, etc., different software tools, and try to group them together to see what are the technologies. And then the third step will be to look at the target markets they're reaching out to, because they do target, some of them are general, but many of them are actually targeting certain markets to do with child labor, for example, sexual exploitation, missing persons, workplace voices, displaced people, supply chain management. And also then to look at their business model and the metrics of how that is organized. So that's the first step. I see that as a descriptive activity, just mapping, describing, grouping, putting together what is, you know, these different actors. And the second stage is to do the more drilling down, the detailed through interviews, I think primarily, using the software of MaxQDA, but to get more into this discursive analysis. I'm not going to say too much here because you have to, unless you would like me to, you can comment on that, but I really want to, through interviews, to get into the reasoning and the framings that the leaders of these organizations are using, what meaning systems they're bringing in to promote or to justify their business solution. What discourses are they using? What reasonings? How are they attempting to disrupt these market conditions that enable modern slavery to persist? What values and rhetorics do they bring to do with forced labor, modern slavery, unfree labor? And how they compete these material, political, social, economic ideologies? My sense, already looking at some of them, is in a lot of cases, these are organizations that have technologies that are looking for a problem. So a lot of discourse around responsibilizing, sustainability. So they're quite ideational in the ways that some of them are framed. And so I want to explore that. So really, to some extent, some of them are perpetuate or have the possibility to perpetuate the fact that modern slavery is there and might persist. So I want to just explore that and whether they really are helping to reduce and identify the conditions that modern slavery occurs, or maybe exacerbating it. So the findings, and as I said, this is work in progress. I've gone so far with it, and now, in a sense, it's the nice part to start to work on the data set, get drilled down into the companies, their websites, and really to do this more detailed analysis. So this, I don't have any findings to present at this point in time, but watch this space. But I just have a couple of two slides that is taken from the Tech Against Trafficking's own website. They've done some very basic level grouping of the 200 companies that are in the coalition. And this is the spread of the kind of activities that these companies are working on. So you see that some of them are working with victims, some of them are working on trafficking, mapping tools, some of them are working on at the level of workers and making their payments more secure. Some of them are more around education, awareness, and so forth. Some of them, the largest majority, in fact, are on victim identification, but also supply chain management, as I said earlier, It's a very, very vibrant area of activity. So that's Tech Against Trafficking's own analysis. I will do my own analysis of this, but just so that you have something just to look at there about where these technologies and these organizations are, which kind of subfields they're working in. And here also is you see the spread, the geographical spread of the organizations and where they're spread. And you see that actually the majority of the organizations are based in North America and 22% in Europe, although there are 1% in Asia. So they've already taken the 200 organizations which they're hoping to grow this database and then map their geographical distribution to ensure that this is not just a North American kind of initiative. It is that these technologies are being developed and deployed across the world. Okay, so I come now, I think, to my last slide. So just to, yes, this is my last slide, just to summarize a little bit the contribution. So as I said, I started with modern slavery. I want to get to understanding better how anti-slavery organizations are working, how they bring together this mix of technology, material aspects, social, moral, economic aspects, and how they negotiate all of that in order to provide a solution to this social or humanitarian problem. And showing how through that entanglement they negotiate these complex emotive and ideological tensions as related to solidarity, responsibility, sustainability, or unfree labor. Okay, so thank you for your attention. I hope that that was interesting. Am I on reasonably good time, Rocky?
It's perfect. Like we have 30 minutes for discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's certainly very challenging not seeing people's
yeah,
faces, and seeing their reactions, or so I feel like I'm kind of a bit talking one-to-one with Rocky, which is also very nice. But so I'm very interested to have your comments or questions or ideas, feedback on what I've said. I'd also like to bring in my PhD student, Alex. Alex,
I will add Alex as a panelist so we can see him. So now I've put Alex as our panelist.
Maybe Alex can just say hello first.
Hi, Alex. You can turn on your camera.
Turn on your camera. Shall I stop sharing my screen now, Rocky?
Yeah, it's okay. You can stop the screen sharing. Hi, Alex. You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I put you on the spot. You weren't expecting that.
Please unmute yourself. We cannot hear you.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Still muted. Right.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
All right. Hello, everyone.
So yes, this is Alex.
Hi, Alex.
And, yes, just to introduce you to the community of people we have here.
Yeah.
That's great.
And Alex, go ahead.
It's very nice to meet Rocky because you're the former PhD student of Denise. So I am kind of your replacement, but it's very nice to meet you, even though it's virtually.
Yeah. Looking forward to be in touch further later on, Alex. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Okay, sure. All right, so I will allow the audience now to put their thoughts. You can use the raise hand feature in the webinar, the Zoom, or you can write down in Q&A. We later on can allow you to talk if you would like to. And
maybe they can put on their camera, Rocky, when they're asking the question, because it would be
nicer. Yeah. So please raise your hand, and I will allow you to turn on your camera. So now we have here from Maria. We'll allow her to talk, and you can share your screen. Maria, please, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's clear. Can you also on the video if it's possible?
So sorry. I don't see how I can do that.
Let me see. Okay, let's see. So I will maybe promote you to a panelist, so it's easier for you to speak. Okay, you can turn on the camera, I hope. Yeah, okay, please, yeah.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Rocky and
So,
and there's also Mr. Alex. It is very interesting in these topics, but my concern is whether it's in Asia. Sometimes the technology is not so sophisticated as you have out there in Europe or Australia or even in United States. So sometimes it is difficult to tracking the modern slavery here, because sometimes the data is not complete, or even we cannot detect it, or maybe the victim is also under the threat from someone. And the organization is really close about this. They're doing this very good. They're hiding this operation very perfectly, so nobody can identify whether this is a kind of modern slavery inside. So also sometimes the government did not really good care about this issue. So I think in Asia, this is very challenging, because sometimes we didn't know. Also, a lot of people still don't know what is modern slavery is, and there is still good tracking how we can identify this, because it's very difficult, because they are doing in a Snoopy operation, something like that, hiding and close the organization from the people, and it's not good expose something like that. And even if we can identify this, the government still don't even care about this. So what do you think? Do you think this kind of method of research, or maybe you have some better, good, sophisticated methodology or idea to solve this problem specifically in the development country, which is not so very aware about this, the technological things, the awareness, the organization sometimes is, sometimes you like a dark house, is very close, very isolated with a great high big wall, but we cannot understand why this house is very isolated, because inside there is modern slavery happen inside. So we didn't know about this. We cannot just breaking their walls and say, hi, are you doing modern slavery? So it's very hard to detect this, what is it, the modern slavery in our country specifically. So I need your opinion, your expertise opinion about this.
It's a very important question that you asked there, and I don't think it's any easier in other countries. It's still very hidden. It's still very hidden, even in the UK, which is quite, to some extent, quite advanced in terms of, it has the Modern Slavery Parliament Act. It has a lot of universities that have programs, education programs, university programs. There's a lot of webinars and research being put into exposing the situations where slavery is happening. But even so, in spite of all of many good things happening, it's still a very hidden and not very well understood phenomena. And I think that's not just unique to Indonesia or Asia. I think it's the same everywhere. So I just think that I don't think there is any one answer or easy solution. Clearly, campaigns, advertising campaigns, I suppose it's multi-pronged, so coming to it from different perspectives. So newspaper reports on it is helpful, television documentaries, government policy, or having the government on board is clearly the best thing. Having NGOs who are trying to understand it better or identify where it's happening on the ground. But it is difficult as a researcher. So those things need to happen. But then as a researcher, trying to find space within there, it's also difficult. I mean, I'm not a technology expert, and I'm not necessarily interested in the technology per se. I'm interested in how the technology, the discourses around it, and how it's being used to address what is a humanitarian problem. And I have a bit of a sneaky feeling, a gut feeling, that it's not really, it's more about the technology than the actual problem here. So, but I think gaining access to these difficult situations, I mean, I don't know, maybe Alex would like to say something in a moment, because you can have the best research design in the world, but at the end of the day, if you can't get access to talk to people, about
sure.
where you think what is happening, then nothing will happen.
Yeah.
But we think that maybe approaching governmental bodies or NGOs to gather data. Alex will do his research in South Africa, and that will be your approach there, Alex.
Exactly. NGOs, government offices, hopefully true NGOs, perhaps victims of modern slavery, who can help us a little bit further with possibly other actors that we don't know of or don't know about, that could be quite useful to investigate. So I guess I would say that it's all about networking. You have to start somewhere and then try to go further step by step, dig a little deeper. But the interesting part about, or the interesting thing about modern slavery is that so many actors are actually involved in this issue. So that makes it quite interesting, but also quite complex to investigate, I would say, where to start. Who is the most interesting person to talk to interview, and who would provide the most truthful information, I would say, because, well, if you investigate companies, or if you, they may be rather reluctant to actually share some information. I'm doing research on recruitment agencies. Well, Denise and I expect that, well, some or many of these recruitment agencies may not be very open to talk about practices like modern slavery. But on the other hand, you have to start somewhere, because I want to add something to what Denise said a couple of minutes ago about the fact that it's a very hidden practice. I think that is very true, but on the other hand, it sometimes may be less hidden than we actually think it is, especially based on research that I know about from India. And India is actually a very common practice. I am referring to Kara, who did some extensive research on India. And he actually wrote in his book in 2017 that you can sometimes simply see it when you take a bus ride through the countryside. That these may actually be victims of modern slavery, but it's so ingrained in the culture, and people in general are just not very aware of what modern slavery is, as you say, that you do not always realize that that is modern slavery that is taking place. But to answer to your question directly, I would say it's all about networking, and try to interview as many actors as possible to try to create a certain network that you can then use to get to the core of the problem.
Can I have get the contact email from these two speakers today, Mr. Rocky, Mr. Alex, also Mrs. Denise, if you allow, because I want to share with you how to do research in this field. So
yes, of course.
Please, can you share? Sure. Thank you so much.
One of the things I wanted to say is that it would be very nice to build collaboration or some kind of alliance with your institution there. If there's a small group of people that want to do research on this topic, you know, we are just building we're in Luxembourg, supposedly one of the most developed and richest countries in the world, but still there's no research program directly, explicitly on slavery. We have lawyers working on human rights, of course, so we also want to build our own research program in this area. So connecting, reaching out to different other academic institutions would be very nice. So yes, we're happy for that.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you for your sharing. It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Denise and Mr. Alex, and also Mr.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, thank you, Maria.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Yeah, so I would like to also comment on that. One of the things is that the normalizing of the society. If you combine modern slavery and culture, then you see people they don't feel that they are actually enslaved, and they're normalizing it. and they accept it even. So this is yeah, makes it difficult for everyone to see from the victim's point of view that they don't feel that they're actually enslaved. So combining this culture also, yeah, it is a hidden process that I see. Right. So yeah, for the audience, please raise your hand if you'd like to. So we have here, okay, one from Muhammad Farhan Abid. I will just promote to panelists so you can share your video and speak. Please, Farhan.
Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, Professor Fletcher. Good morning, Mr. Alex, and good afternoon, Dr. Rocky. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Okay. My question is, as we know that in companies like in Europe, they publish their modern slavery statement on their websites, right? Well, I checked in Indonesia, there is no modern slavery statement on their websites in Indonesia. So my question is it mandatory for companies to publish their modern slavery statements? And I don't think Indonesia don't have any modern slavery act statement here.
No, not yet. Maybe in time, but no, in the UK and in Australia, I think France have something, also California, they have this requirement, this mandatory legal requirement that organisations over a certain turnover, so over £36 million turnover, they have to declare a modern slavery statement on their websites to show the transparency of what is happening in different aspects of their organization and their supply chain. And so actually, so no, it's not happening in Indonesia yet because there's no law or mandatory requirement. But at the same time, what a lot of researchers are now doing is downloading those statements and doing secondary data analysis of those statements. So this is also quite a growing area of research. So you understand that if an organization, I don't know, take a big, I don't know what you would know over there, but take a big organization, I don't know who you know, like Tesco or Marks and Spencer, I'm not sure who to say, but, and then you analyze what they say they are doing in terms of modern slavery. So a lot of people are doing, secondary data analysis of these reporting mechanisms. So even though you might not have modern slavery statements of Indonesian companies, but certainly from Australia, I think you would have them, and some Californian companies and certainly some European companies. So it might not mean you could analyze the statements of Indonesia, but you could certainly reach out to beyond Indonesia and maybe to look to draw lessons and to benchmark what other companies are doing, to develop templates, this kind of thing that could be applied in Indonesia in time, although clearly that's going to take time.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Fletcher.
I think Alex wants to add something.
Yes, please, Alex.
I would like to add that so Denise mentioned that there are indeed laws in California, in France, indeed, in the UK, in Australia. But it's interesting to see that more and more countries in Europe are actually developing laws with regard to human rights due diligence for corporations, not only on a national level, but also the European Union has now been developing a directorate, I think it is called, with regard to human rights due diligence to require companies to actually report on their modern slavery or anti-slavery operations. And I think this is important also for Indonesia, because there may be many European companies who actually have
Operations.
what do you say? Operations in countries like Indonesia. Indonesia is a very big country, a very interesting country for many European companies. So I think that what is happening in the EU, for example, may after some time, hopefully have an impact on Indonesia as well.
Yeah, maybe, and you just triggered, thanks Alex, you just triggered another thought for me, because this is not directly related to research, but I think another thing that we can do as academics is that we can actually start to bring these topics into our teaching in the business management area. And this is something I think is not really happening that much. We bring in sustainability or the need for organizations to act responsibly. But when we're teaching management, accounting, marketing, different aspects of it, I think we have scope to give case examples of organizations that are, you know, developing their brand in a certain way to address this. Or you can look at the transparency statement, the you know, the reporting statements, etc. And I mean, in my teaching for entrepreneurship, we have a course now which is called, well, we have a general business model course, and then we have a second course which is more about sustainability. And I make sure now that when the students are working on their business models for developing a business idea, they're breaking it down and looking at which different suppliers they can work with, which different organizations or stakeholders they can work with, what is their value proposition. I'm pushing them now to actually address issues to do with labor, how they address their labor, issues to do with modern slavery. So if they're going to develop a business idea and they're buying or sourcing that product from a certain company, that they check that that company is legitimate and responsible and not being irresponsible. So I think that also not only in research, I think we can be active in teaching and start to create this awareness with our students in different aspects of management. It can come into every aspect of business and management. Yeah. So maybe to Mohammed, maybe to do some work or research with multinational companies or big European companies that are employed in the region, and to try to access them, to ask them what they're doing about modern slavery. Maybe this would be a step forward. So hopefully that's useful, Mohammed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Farhan. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you go, Rob.
No, Alex, what is it? Yeah, no problem.
Okay, I just wanted to add that it might also be interesting to look at organizations like the ILO, because they always have country programs. I'm not sure, but I assume that they also have a country program in Indonesia. It might be interesting to see how they lobby with the government in terms of corporate sustainability, human rights due diligence, laws with regard to anti-slavery and so on.
Right. Yeah, well, what I observe in Indonesia, also in China, I think we have this wave of new like ride-hailing services, right? Uber, but for Indonesian, we have like two big brands, and with this technology, people are suddenly are freed. Also interesting that you mentioned unfree labor. They're freed because of the technology, but also at the same time, they can become enslaved as well because of that technology. So it's controlled by this technology. So to me, yeah, interesting to see how technologies. We used to have this Industry 4.0 discourse, and then we're embracing it like as a savior of the world. And then later on, it became enabler of a new kind of slavery. And what is interesting, what I see is that there's another anti-slavery organization here that is trying to tackle that. So to me, this is the phenomenon that we can tap into.
So if you could identify anti-slavery organizations that are working in Indonesia, even if they're not located there, but maybe they're focused on it. I definitely had a couple of technologies that were focusing around that region anyway. I can't remember now which one. So to anyone listening, that would be a way in. The International Labour Organization, their work and their programs is also the trafficking in persons, which I think is a mandatory national reporting mechanism to show what the countries are doing to address trafficking in persons.
Right.
And also don't underestimate the importance of new businesses. We tend to think of modern slavery in big multinationals that are well developed in their structures, but individual entrepreneurs have a responsibility to think how they're sourcing product, or the very idea that they're creating, that it's not going to do harm further, down the value chain. So it's also a mindset we need to get into, to entrepreneurs when they're starting businesses, and managers if they're doing a management program, that they go back to their workplace and they start to think about this.
Yeah. To me,
Okay.
the fact that this is a multidisciplinary field is interesting, that you can connect different fields together, like supply chain, you mentioned, marketing, others, ethics, of course, yes, so yeah, a lot of potentials really that maybe we are not aware of, and yeah, I think the challenging part is really to discover this phenomenon, because it's
and to develop for yourself a little niche within it, because it's
right.
a big topic. It can be a little bit overwhelming knowing where to settle, and as researchers we can't do everything, so we could develop a little niche within it. So a lot of people choose a sector: construction, I don't know, different kind of sector, cotton, fishing. So some people focus on a sector and become an expert in that and gather all their data around that. So that's also a way to make it more manageable.
Right. Okay, if we allow the question, we have one written question by Fabian. It's, would you like to share information about state-sponsored slavery and how governments can be pressured to end state-sponsored slavery? I think it's interesting to see whether state can be involved in the slavery phenomenon. Do you have any comments on that?
It's a really, really interesting question. It's something I feel very strongly about. I don't have any answers here. I know that of the forced labor that there is in the world, 64% is coming from the private economy, and that 17%, is coming from state labor, forced labor by the state in prisons or in these work camps, etc. And this is not a new phenomena. This is something that happens during world wars, and it's not a new phenomena either. This is a really interesting area, and I think is not really being very well researched, and is just right for people to look into this. But as for lobbying and campaigning for governments this to me is kind of a bit out of my scope. I don't know if you have a comment, Alex, but I don't have expertise to bring to that. There's a lot of lobbying going on and campaigning around this sort of topic, especially with the use of prison labor. So being forced in prisons to produce certain goods that are then sold for a profit as a commodity. So I'd like to signal it as a very interesting area that more work needs to be done, policy work and research work and education work.
Yeah, I would agree. It's an amazingly interesting area, a very important one too, because I must say I also do not have a clear answer to this, because I am also focused on the private economy instead of state-sponsored forced labor or slavery. But I want to highlight two interesting cases in this area, and that's Uzbekistan and China. Uzbekistan, I think it's in the cotton industry. It's one of the countries that is most known to employ state-sponsored slavery. And only a few days ago, I think it's Free the Slaves or Anti-Slavery International released a new report on forced labor sponsored by the state in Uzbekistan last year, so in 2020. It's a practice that has been known for a couple of years already, definitely by governments, policymakers, and so on. But it seems that nothing is changing about the situation. So indeed, what do you do then? Sure that there must have been some lobbying going on, but apparently nothing changes. So how do we actually approach this problem? And another interesting and more famous case is, of course, the camps or also the cotton industry in China. And what's very interesting about this case is that Nike and H&M recently canceled their operations in China in the sense that they do not import cotton anymore that is coming from China, especially the region Xinjiang, if I pronounce it correctly, because as you may know, it is known for these re-education camps, as China says it, for the Uyghur minority.
Yeah, the Uyghur, I see.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so Nike and H&M do not import any cotton anymore from this region. And this is now turning into a quite interesting situation in China itself, because on social media, and that brings us to technology, Nike and H&M are now actually being very much criticized by not only Chinese policymakers, but also the Chinese population. So it's an interesting situation to keep an eye on. So what Nike and H&M do, does this have any impact? Will this create some change or not? Is that the way forward? Perhaps some interesting questions to reflect on.
Right, thanks, Alex. I'm afraid the time is already telling us something in the end. And Denise, would you like to have last comments from you? Last thoughts, maybe.
Yes, I mean, clearly we think this is a very important topic for research, for education, for teaching, and we would really encourage people to get into this field. Although I'm an older person, I only came into this topic a couple of years ago, so I was established in another field. So, you know, definitely feel that there's a lot of scope in this field to work and to find little niches. So we are looking to reach out and collaborate with people in your institution. So this is something we're very keen to do.
Right. So thank you for
your time.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you all. And I think this session really, if I can mention some takeaways, is that sometimes as a researcher, we are doing things that is in our tribe. We like to do things that is on our own interest, but doesn't have any impact in the real world. And by taking on these issues, sustainability issues, ethics issues, human slavery issues, I think it allows us to really step out from that little, let us say, tribe and really have something that is contributing to the real discourse. And I think this is also a reflection as a researcher that we should do things that also matters people socially as well. So thank you, Denise, for bringing this new themes, which I believe spark inspiration for all of us. And I hope we can continue our discussion later on in terms of collaboration, research between different institutions together. As you said, we can make an initiative to tackle this on together.
Yeah, so we are happy for our emails to be distributed. Okay. If people want to follow up with questions or thoughts or ideas or potential collaboration, this is also okay.
Thank you so much, Denise. Also, Alex, for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for making this opportunity, Rocky. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, everyone. So we will end this webinar now. So thank you for joining. I will see you maybe in the next series. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Denise, for sharing your ongoing work.